Renting versus buying. This is the ultimate housing question that comes up every day of our lives. Am I right? Before we dive into rent versus buy, the ultimate battle, let's touch on mortgages and refinancing options real quick. Mortgages are very case by case and circumstantial on what you should do. Some of you should refinance while others shouldn't. Some of you should sell your homes because it's a money pit, and some of you shouldn't. For those living in a primary residence paying a mortgage and are thinking about refinancing, I'd advise the following. Only refinance if you can get a lower interest rate or lower monthly mortgage payment without having to add years to your loan term. Those requirements alone means you are going to have a battle ahead of you. This is a conversation to have with your loan officer. A good rule of thumb to live by when considering refinancing is not to put yourself in more debt in order to try and get out of debt. That's the opposite of what we're trying to do here. But let's get to rent versus buy. Rent versus buy. If you own a home and are swimming in debt, it may be a good idea to downsize from having a mortgage to renting. I know some of you just audibly gasp, but hear me out. When you buy a home, you undergo a lot of different expenses than rent does. When you buy, you have to eat the cost of realtor fees, property tax, home maintenance, insurance, mortgage interest, and the mortgage principal. When you rent, you pay for rent, right? So if your mortgage is $900 and you rent a place that's $900, you have to include the maintenance, property tax, and all those other factors I just mentioned into your mortgage expenses as well. So it's usually not a baseline 900. So, and why do I bring this up? Because you're trying to get out of debt. Selling your home, making some profit, then renting until you can actually afford a home is a much better route to go than do yourself dirty by thinking you're getting a deal when in fact you're not taking into consideration all of those other expenses that come along with home ownership. Feel me? So let me be clear. I am pro ownership. I hope we all own homes, but the fact of the matter is it may not be the best money decision for everyone. A lot of times things may be the right decision just at the wrong time. So if your monthly take home is $2,000 and you spend $900 on rent, you have $1,100 left to do what you want. Hopefully put it towards your debt. When you have a monthly take home of $2,000 and your mortgage is $900 and your monthly maintenance is $100 and your insurance is $50, you only get to use $950. That's only $950 left over, which, as you know, over time becomes a considerable amount of money. Every dollar counts. So I'd say downsize, rent at a way lower dollar amount than what your mortgage was, and enjoy not having the responsibility of maintaining your home while you pay off your debt. We got some more thoughts on rent versus buying. We may cover more of this when we chat about taxes later in the course, but things to consider when deciding whether to rent or to buy are also the tax benefits. Property tax, if you itemize, is usually deductible from federal income taxes, but when you rent, you'll never see that money again. It's already factored into the rent. Mortgage interest, if you itemize, this is deductible, but when you rent, you won't see that money ever again. In most cases, you can deduct all of your home mortgage insurance. How much you can deduct depends on the date of the mortgage, the amount of the mortgage, and how you use the mortgage proceeds. Home equity. This is money that you are saving in your house instead of investing in the market. Home values have a different risk return curve than equities, but not necessarily a better one. Utilities. Even if utilities aren't included in rent, most people buy a larger home if they own than if they rent. So utilities are usually higher. They are also higher per square foot for freestanding houses than for apartment buildings. Some apartment complexes also have reduced cable and internet prices or better service. Renters also may not pay specifically for water, sewer, trash removal, lawn services, all that stuff. I don't pay for my utilities. It's worked into the rent, which has actually saved me $200 a month. Also, many times people undergo farther commutes to work because they have to go out of the town or city they are in to be able to find a house or something they can actually afford, which adds to your transportation expenses. HOA fees. This usually applies to owners, not always, but it may apply to owners. Maintenance, which we already mentioned. If you own, you pay to fix things instead of, the landlord just paying them. Hey, my toilet broke. Landlord's got to fix it. It's not on you unless you own. So in summation, once again, my recommendation for someone who is attempting to get out of debt you should go with the option that has you spend less money. You need more money in your pocket so you can get out of debt. That's the fact of the matter. The more money you have, the more money you can put on your debt. Your home ownership may be eating away at your ability to pay off your debt quickly. Once again, I am not advocating for one or the other. I'm advocating for the one that saves you the most money, which, if you're in a position to share a home with more people and drive rent down, that works great. We'll do more on house hacking and rent hacking in a moment, but there's something called a price to rent ratio that is not the end all be all when deciding which route to go, but it does help gauge and gauge to make a better decision. And it's a metric that can be used to point you in the right direction. So the price to rent ratio is a number that gives you a rough idea about whether homes in your area or the area you want to live in is fairly priced. And to calculate the price to rent ratio, first thing you do is you find two similar homes. It could be a home, it could be a condo, it could be an apartment, it could be a piece of land for all I care. I don't know. It could be anything. One has to be for sale and one has to be for rent. And next, you divide the sale price of the place for sale by the annual rent from the other. So, as an example, if you find a if you find a $300,000 home for sale in a nice neighborhood, you go and find a similar house down the street or on the next block that is for rent for $1,600 a month. Both of those numbers are kind of high, and I am aware of that. When you divide 300,000 by, unless you're in California, if you buy 300,000 by 19,200, which is the annual rent, 1,600 times 12, you get 15.625. Pretty neat, right? What does that even mean? What does 15.625 even mean? So in 2018, the normal price to rent ratio range nationwide was between 10 and 14, meaning it would cost $1,200 to $1,600 to rent a $2,000 house. During the 90s, it was between 14 and 15, so about $1,100 to $1,200 to rent a $200,000 house. Then during our last housing bubble, the national price to rent ratio rose from 22.73 in 2005, then to 24.5 in 2007 before the markets collapsed. So basically, when the price to rent ratio was telling everyone, hey, you should rent, you should not go buy a home, everyone was like, I'm going to buy a home. So we may be seeing something similar to that in today's market, but that's besides the point. Here's a rough idea of what that number means for you. This is what you want to know. When price to rent ratios are under 12, it's usually better to buy than to rent. When price to rent ratios are between 12 and 15, that's when you have to look at your personal expenses and make the best financial decision based off of the numbers you can extract. And when the price to rent ratio is above 15, you are for sure better off renting. That means the home price is way too high. Definitely should rent. This isn't a hard line in the sand, but it's definitely a good gut indicator about what the best move is for you financially. This is also got to be mentioned. We're going to do a brief overview on house hacking and rent hacking. House hacking in general is buying a multifamily home as a owner occupant, renting out the other units and living in one of the units yourself. So if you bought a triplex, you lived in one, rented out two other units. You lived in a quadplex, fourplex, rented out the other three, you lived in one, and the units you are renting out will cover your mortgage and housing expenses so you can live free. You have free housing. For the purpose of this course, I would only recommend this to those who already own a home. The likelihood that you own a multi-family home is not very high. However, this also doesn't stop you from renting out a room or a space in your house so you can bring in additional income to drive down your housing cost. I think that's a form of house hacking in a way. And then the next thing I want to review is rent hacking. Rent hacking is essentially renting out a larger space than you usually would need and renting out the remaining rooms. I understand this comes with risk. It's a little uncanny, but I know you are smart people and capable individuals who can make something like this work. So for example, if you usually rent out a 1-bedroom apartment for yourself for $1,200 a month, that means you're out $1,200. You're just paying $1,200 a month. That's it. But if you chose to rent a 4-bedroom home that costs $3,200 per month, that has ample space, you can rent out the other 3 rooms for $1,100 a month, collect $3,300 a month at the end of the month, and then profit $100 a month. You don't even own the property. You're just renting You're just renting it out. You're controlling, you're facilitating all of that rent that's going on. The only thing to be sure of is you have to choose your renters wisely. If you choose to do this, you got to make sure they don't have pets. I recommend they did no pets, and ensure your lease allows sublets. Don't do this if the lease you sign is without sublets. If you go to a landlord, you got to be upfront, be like, hey, I plan on renting this house from you, this 4-bedroom house, and I plan on renting it out to other people at a higher rate so I could live for free. And some of them are going to be cool with it, some of them are not. If they're not cool with it, just don't even bother. Remember, if you do this, you will be held liable for any damage that happens from one of your subleasers. You will be held responsible for getting all the rent in on time, which means you got to make sure your tenants, technically your tenants, are paying their rent. So screen your tenants wisely, very diligently, collect security deposits. And there are risks to both of these options, but I figured they are worth mentioning for the tenacious ones of you, those maniacs out there. So how much do you even pay for housing in general? Someone who is debt-free and financially wise is probably paying between 20 to 25% at most for their recurring housing costs. Normal individuals trying to get out of it are paying between 18 and 20% for their monthly housing costs. A good tier is between 14 to 17%. That's somebody's like, yeah, I'm getting out of debt, I'm gonna pay a little less. And the maniac tier is living at 13% and below their monthly income. And I think that sweet spot of like, you're not depriving yourself of life is around 8%. So that's what I would say. Wonderful. We've covered how to cut expenses in our housing. Next, we're going to be chatting about how to cut food expenses. We'll see you there.